My question is, when an urban professional is beginning a project, especially public projects, how can he or she have a collaborative approach towards design? How can design be participatory?
Well, I'll start with the back of the question, which is the issue of collaboration. Collaboration is it's a buzzword. We are all in pursuit of collaboration today. I think we generally think it's the route to successful behavior and projects. But I will speak a little bit with anecdotes, which I'll probably do in every answer I give. So my anecdote on collaboration is I am often a professional advisor to competitions. There was a big competition in New York for intermediate housing, post-disaster housing, run by the City of New York, the Office of Emergency Management, international competition, 300 entries. In the end, it was quite curious. It was wonderful. Instead of giving a first, second, and third prize, 20,000, 10,000, 5,000, they said, the entries are really good. Let's do away with that. We're going to give 10 first prizes and 10 honorable mentions, split the prize money among the 10 winners. So they did that. Then I had the privilege of being the professional advisor and opening the envelopes of the anonymous competitors. So the 10 winners, 9 of them were collaborative teams, multidisciplinary collaborative teams, combining architects, engineers, sociologists, government people, lawyers. They were very rich. Of the 10 honorable mentions, only one was a collaborative team. The others were all individuals. It was kind of, an unprogrammed research project. I couldn't have asked for a better example, given the number of contestants, the excellent jurors who made the decisions, and then the result. Now, jumping forward past the 9/11 tragedy in New York, the chancellor of my university asked all of the professors in my college to come together and come up with collaborative programs that would help respond to the changing circumstances evidenced by that tragedy. We sat around, the deans of about 10 schools. Everybody came up with fantastic ideas. And after those ideas were promulgated, and it came time to implement, it fell apart. Nobody knew how to truly implement a collaborative process. Who was going to be responsible for what? Who was going to bear the various costs? Who was going to take on the administration? There are people who are expert in this. So my sense is we don't teach how to do this. We don't teach how people can and should work together. We think it's something that's born in the DNA, but it's like anything else. There are specifics, there are processes, and you have to do it with will. You can't do it just by desire. So that's my probably too long an answer, and I hope it suffices for the question.
Thank you, Lance. I'll go to my left, Marina, from International Federation of Landscape Architects. As I mentioned just now, that United Nations declared 2020 and 2030 the decade of ecosystem restoration. As I understand that UI and IFLA engage in this challenge and establish a joint project called UIA-IFLA Indigenous Ecosystem Corridor and Nodes Project. How do you plan to advocate the restructuring ecosystem across the areas where occupied by human settlements?
Hello? Okay, so I think this is a very interesting project because it focuses exactly on what's happening with nature within the urban settlement, so all across urban areas and how you connect these urban areas to its peri-urban or forestal areas outside. But most of all, we are very proud of this project because, and to link with lands, it's an example of cooperation between the International Federation of Landscape Architects and the International Architects Union. And that means that we share a common vision to make this principle the principle of the indigenous ecosystem corridor to be applied at different scales, so from international to regional to local scales. But it's the sharing of this vision that can make happen the project. So the project, in fact, it's quite simple as it's a statement. It's saying, well, there's a biota that it's settled in places because it's more suitable in those places. We want to enhance this idea of continuity. So let's try to bridge similar biota in the city. So that means trying to find pockets of terrenbag, of street vegetation, of parks that have similar ecosystems that are indigenous to that place, and we try to connect them. That can happen at the urban scale, but we could talk also that could happen at peri-urban areas or in rural areas. And through this vision, that it's a gesture, you are linking, you are connecting, you are creating these indigenous ecosystem corridors and nodes, and you are creating a network. So that's the principle. And that's useful for two reasons, because in short term, you are increasing resilience, but also if we believe in that project in a long term, you are increasing the stability and the diversity of the biodiversity, the genetic biodiversity on the site. So I think for us, it's a good cooperation. We learn from each other, from both professions, about basically these nature-based systems, the sustainable urban drainage. So these kind of worries that are up to technical solutions at the final term, but it's through the common vision and cooperation that we can talk on specific projects.
Hope we come up with a good solution at the end of this project. Now I will move towards our planners organization president, Martin Dubbeling. Martin, do you think the economic forces are transforming the spatial pattern of development in our cities? If so, how do the socio-economic attributes of the spatialization process and pattern influence in a particular developing context?
Thank you very much for your question. It is amongst the basic elements of urban planning and design to analyze the spatial patterns of present cities. What you often see is the pattern, the urban fabric of a city is the manifestation of its past and present economy. You can, if you have a look at, if you carefully analyze the footprint or the urban fabric, the layout, the design, or the present situation of a city, you can easily find out that it was a trade city or a military city, a harbor city, or it was a place of governance, storage and trade, all kinds of other businesses, or it was an agricultural city more than a trade city, etc. So all those cities we have around the globe all their patterns are based upon the basic economy. And it becomes interesting, it becomes very, very interesting when those cities throughout time have redeveloped their business model. Sometimes a port city became a military city, sometimes a military city became a touristical city, sometimes a governance city became also a business city. And what you see is that the most successful cities we have, and we always talk about the inevitable Barcelona, just to mention one, or Sydney, or any other city of that kind. You see, it has gained through time, in the past decades, more functions. while keeping the old functions. Barcelona is still a harbor city. It's still a part of fishery. It is an economical city, and it became a major event city because of the Olympics. And it has a major city. Everyone has Barcelona in it. When you talk Barcelona, are you talking about a soccer team, or are you talking about the city? So that identity of that city, it comes through also the economy. Football, European soccer, is also a kind of economy. It's also marketing. When you compare that with Chinese cities like Guangzhou, Wuhan, Nanjing, they all want to become cities like London and Paris and New York, and they want to expand their central business districts to become more important. And I always advise them. You already have bigger central business districts than those cities you want to you aspire to be. But it's also important then to make to become a sporting event city, or to attract a museum as important as the Louvre or Tate Gallery. So, in effect, it is the economic forces. Yes, they very much determine the rise and fall of cities. And you see, when cities are not successful anymore, they have failed to attract new functions, and they fail to hold their old, to sustain on their old functions. But it is widely underestimated how important that is. That a city has to value its economy. And look for new economical basics.
Thank you, Martin. I was about to ask you another question, but you already answered that as well here. Really? So that's with the developing countries often follow model of the developed countries. So now I move to David Grossman. Is about all effort in keeping culture and heritage intact wouldn't matter if similar interests are shared. Excuse me. Is about the client and professional relationships. If similar interests are shared between you and your client, it is rather difficult to find clients who are willing to develop schemes that focus on preserving culture, and they are more easily inclined towards their own interest. They therefore fail to recognize the importance of that a country's culture and heritage entails. How do architects, professional planners tackle such a dilemma?
Now? Okay. Well, I'd like to turn your question around a little bit, because you're asking about the professional relationship between the designers and the architects and what you call the clients. And I really question whether, and I can speak for designers as a representative of the International Council of Design, I don't think that designers in all design disciplines have really adopted a canon of professional ethics that would prove that they are acting as professionals. I think that's the question. Because as professionals, if you take a doctor, for example, they have an oath that was established about 2,500 years ago that dictates their responsibilities, what they can and do not do, and people respect that. Designers, which is a profession which has only been around for 100 and 200 years, let's say, since the Industrial Revolution, have not yet developed that type of professional canon. Many of the organizations around this table have signed the Design Declaration in Montreal in 2017, And in it there's a sentence that says, designers too long the servants of producers better serve humanity as the ambassadors of the end users. And as practitioners, when you're a servant, you act one way, and when you're an ambassador, you act another way. And professional designers today, I think, are still working as servants of producers, because designers have the ability, of course, to provide economic value. We all know that. But in all the work they do, whatever they do, even the smallest design decision, has social impact, it has environmental impact, and it has cultural impact. And if they are truly professionals, they're obligated to always make decisions on the economic, social, cultural, and environmental aspects of the work that they do, or they're not being good professionals. They're being servants that are just acting to provide quick profit. And the economic model that is also rather young, it's only been around for 200 years also since the Industrial Revolution, which is based on quick profit and consumption, just enormous consumption. Well, that economic system isn't working very well. We see that in what we're talking about here, environmentally, socially, culturally, and so on. So my answer is that designers will provide much greater value to their clients and be able to influence in these different aspects if we ourselves adopt a professional canon which causes us to act in a different way.
Okay, Lance wants to make a comment to that. He very good.
I don't argue with anything you said. I think it's basically true. The architectural profession in the United States, when you are licensed, you do have a code of ethics. It's quite powerful, and if you adhere to it, you might threaten your own practice. But what I would add, and I'll do it very shortly, is you have a choice of who your clients are going to be. The opportunities for designers and architects to go into public service and create policy, which then directs what the professions do, is very, very powerful. It's unbelievably underrated. I work in a school that had as a mission training people to go into public service who then could work on zoning and codes and policies about what to do to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the people who would suffer the consequences or enjoy the consequences of private development. And this is an underrated thing. It's looked down upon by people. It's looked upon a lower order of business to work in the public interest. And I think we have to give them credit and support and generate and promote that activity.
Could I also add to that? Because
yes,
I agree with you.
Yes.
But I'd add to that very frequently people assume that the work that architects and planners and designers do is good architecture and good design and good planning. But we all know that there's an awful lot of bad architecture and bad planning and bad design. And the price of bad design and bad architecture and bad planning is enormous. And we, the professional organizations, have a role to play in making sure that people understand that the fact that something is called a design is not necessarily a good design, and that people have to understand the difference.
Yes, the quality of design is very, very important. This has been recognized by United Nations also. In New Urban Agenda, it's been mentioned. It's not only design, it has to be quality of design, because quality of design can change the quality of life of the people. So I'll now go to the next question, because I'm trying to make our questions in a varied manner. So it's Lykke from Copenhagen. I was looking for a representative from local government, and she's coming from our city of Copenhagen. My question to Lykke is, at what level, accepting of preservation of culture and adaptation innovation, do we need to do such that it does not compromise the basic profit motive of the market economy and vice versa? So, because you are working in the city, and investment and the cultural preservation has got some conflicting situation. Would you please answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, Copenhagen has been developing a lot over the last year with a lot of new housing and so on. But we're also seeing the entrance to Copenhagen, a new type of stakeholders in the property market. American corporations like Blackstone. We are seeing the Danish pension funds also buying up housing properties, renovating and reletting them at much higher prices. And you say, what does that got to do with cultural heritage? Well, a lot of it has to do with cultural heritage, but because a lot of the things that are happening to these buildings are actually destroying the original architecture of the building. And these are buildings in the center of the city or in the sort of outer rings of Copenhagen, but they have a long history. Copenhagen has a history more than 1,000 years old as a city, and a lot of these buildings have a long history. And if you're just doing it for a short-sighted profit, it will actually have a huge impact. And currently, the national government is actually looking to how can we make sure that they cannot act like this. And it doesn't matter that Blackstone has changed its name into Danish into something like call it Care City. They don't care a lot. That's our feeling, and it's really important that in that process of looking for economic development, you do not sacrifice the cultural heritage, because that's also part of the urban fabric, and it breaks with a long tradition in Denmark of actually restoring rather than demolishing buildings when we are doing like urban renewal.
Thank you, Lykke. Your city is one of the most livable city, and you have also already facing these challenges. And now I think about those cities are in the developing countries already into the challenge. How much challenge they will face now? Yeah. That's a very good overview. Now we come to Sharifah, our youngest panelist here. The more rapidly the countries urbanize, the more critical becomes the question of provisioning the culture. This urbanizing effect shapes and changes the physical environment in two main ways. First, by incorporating the ideas of global consumer behavior and values, and second, by introducing a new commodities which seldom supplement and rather replaces existing time-tested cultural connotation of that place. Do you agree to that statement? And if so, why?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ishtaq. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizer for considering UNMGCY to be part of this session to give some perspective on behalf of the youth. So on this statement, I think this is a hard one because perhaps there is an opportunity to devise again the policies and to give more powers to the citizen to build and shape the environment. And on the housing policies that do not result the massive gentrification, recognizing it land rights of the informal people, for example, and then to supporting the long time businesses and industries on the certain places, and zoning and the land use of the land use laws of the preserving the historic and the neighborhood inside the countries. So I think it is back to the ideas of collaboration with many stakeholders to think back about the decision to maybe to change or to preserve the heritage and culture of the certain areas. For example, I take example in Malacca, in Malaysia, which is known as the historical cities. So if there is no contribution or collaboration within the stakeholders, within the archaeologists, for example. So it will not be the historical cities and recognized by the UNESCO as a heritage cities. So I think it is important for many parties, for the urban professionals, for the archaeologists, because just now I see many good example from the other countries. For example, in Korea, where they also have many historical and heritage spaces, and they think very carefully whether to stick with the to maintain the heritage or to abolish the space. But it is good decision to think to maintain the heritage and culture by building the new development, new construction, and maintain the local people there to contribute to the economics as well.
Thank you, Sharifah. As we gone through one round of questions, now I'd like to open the floor to the for the question to the floor. So if someone, yes, I can see our past president Gaitin Su, please. Can you give the microphone to the floor, please?
I had one question, I don't know who to direct it to, about the Bilbao effect. The Bilbao effect, where you have Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Aliyev Center in Baku, Opera House in Hong Kong, and most recently the Everton, not unbuilt yet, the Everton Stadium in Liverpool, that the economic and the city has almost preferred to lose its UNESCO World Heritage to be able to give more jobs, create redynamization of the city instead of a proven heritage building in the city. How do we deal with this sort of situation? Thank you.
Who would like to respond? Martin.
Well, to come back to my answer on the question, that it's a prolongation of that. It is more elaboration of that. Next to the several functions of cities, or the multiple functions of cities they can have, as it is trade, military, etc., etc. The city that does culture, or inherits culture, or becomes inspirational city, or an I'm looking for a certain creative city. The city that becomes a creative, that's something relatively new. Maybe Florence was the creative cities of the Enlightenment, so to speak, after the Middle Ages. So every now and then a city pops up and becomes a creative city, or an event city, etc., etc., etc. Or everybody knows city because of the opera. Everybody now knows Hamburg because of also its new theater. So these are the newest functions that a city can have. I'd rather emphasize the creative city as a new business model, because you see a lot of visitors going there, because it also stimulates new businesses, new cultures, etc. I'd rather talk about that than, for instance, smart cities. Smart cities is just it was a phase, so to speak. It is a hype, because in principle, the cities without its inhabitants, it's a collection of buildings, and together it's stupid. They're not creative. They're not living. So cities in itself, a smart city is to my idea, it is a kind of contradiction in itself. A smart city, and especially when the city is smarter than its citizens, you are in great danger. Because a smart city, it's more about control. smart city is about knowing everything about you, which can help you, etc. But I'd rather would focus for the happiness of its inhabitants. I would like to put the people first. What do the people want? What makes them happy? What makes them happy? It makes them happy to have pleasant inner spaces, green parks, safe and reliable and luxurious public transport. That means that the city in itself needs to think. City in itself needs to be creative and need to be invited to engage. So, and a creative city helps with that. The same is with sports. The more you look at sports, the more you're going to do more practices yourself and become more healthier, so to speak. So in a way, the creative cities, that's what you're referring to, is a very much important element of city making and place making.
Can I say something about that? To answer your specific question, I think we have to. The answer, of course, is to find a balance between what is going on. But I think we have to remember that the heritage that we talk about, we talk about it in terms of the past. But when it was created, it was today that those buildings and those designs were created by architects and planners and designers. Tomorrow's heritage is being made today by designers. Heritage is a dynamic thing. It's not something that has to be preserved. It's something that is dynamic and continues to be created by designers and architects.
Thank you.
I love hearing happiness. Many architects are here at WUF, and they come every year. I'm an architect. I know that climate change, population growth, migration, the issues that we face are devastating to our thinking of how to continue and include everything. Not really to balance, but to achieve new integration of all of these elements. And I don't know how to do it, but I do know that with increased population, we must build faster, design more cities, faster, and we have to get the kind of cooperation of all the elements of a team, an architect, planning, social, cultural team. How can we do this and do it faster and better? How can we improve our profession? What do we have to do?
Yeah, thank you. This is a big challenge, and that's why we will come to, because we have to finish one round. So that's why on my left we got youth, and also we have to have the innovative idea how to do that. And I'm gonna go for the next round of question. We got 25 minutes, so I'll ask our panelists to be very brief. I'll start with Lance again. And it's another debate. I mean, I understand that we are opening up each of the question, opening up more questions, debate. To Lance, the American Institute of Architects strongly opposed on February 7th, very recently, to the potential executive order by Trump administration that could force all future federal buildings to be designed in United States in a neoclassical style. This is a decree or sort of force thing. Some people in US administration considered this this opposition to be opposing beauty, tradition, and preservation of cultural heritage. What is your view about it, being an American architect?
Everybody in the room knows the name of Donald Trump, yeah? That should perhaps be an answer, but I'll try and give the answer in another way. In the early 1980s, I had the privilege of working for the National Endowment for the Arts. That's the agency in the United States that supports financially the arts in America. It doesn't do quite as well as the Aga Khan does in his awards program for support of the arts. It doesn't do as well as the British Heritage Foundation or the Canadians do. But it is what we have. It has a very small budget. It has a budget that has been described correctly as smaller than the Army Marching Band. It's a very tiny budget, maybe $100, $120 million a year. But it works very hard to try and establish a process whereby there is design excellence in America. And it has had over the years some champions, and those champions are not necessarily professionals. The greatest amongst them that I know of personally, a person that I knew, was a fellow named Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, when I met him, maybe 20 years after his quite famous writings about design, instituted in the federal government something called the Cooperative Use Act. The United States government had built a new building in Washington, D.C., the headquarters for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. It wiped out an enormous block of traditional buildings in the center of Washington, D.C., and he and colleagues were appalled at the loss of cultural heritage in that city, and not only in its physical fabric, but in its social and economic function, meaning it took a commercial district and it removed all the commerce so that the blocks surrounding this building became discontinuous. You were walking down a shopping street and all of a sudden you had 1,000 feet of off the building line, rather repulsive stone in a way that was frightening in a way. The FBI wasn't there to be friendly and comfortable. So he wrote the Cooperative Use Act, which basically said theretofore, after 1982, whichever it was, all federal buildings had to work within the context of the neighborhoods in which they were being built. They couldn't disregard the surrounding. It was a pure and simple and beautiful urban design comment. So the architects in the United States who are responding to the possibility of, let me see if I can get this because I want to read it to you, the possibility of a change of direction referred to something called the guiding principles for federal architecture, penned by Moynihan and colleagues in 1962. There are only 3 principles. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to read the key one. The first one says the policy shall provide requisite and adequate facilities. So it's very important. It should do the right thing. And the last one says choice of the development of the building site should be considered as a first step. That's also somewhat self-evident. But the middle one says the development of an official style must be avoided. Design must flow from the architectural profession to the government, not vice versa. The government should be willing to pay some additional cost to avoid excessive uniformity in design of federal buildings. Competitions for the design of federal buildings may be held where appropriate. The advice of distinguished architects ought to, as a rule, be sought prior to the award of important design contracts. So they are They are. I'm just saying that there is a big pushback on the part of the architectural profession. There's a pushback on people who worked within the government, and there would be pushback from me, but I don't have a problem with classical architecture.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Lance. We are running out of time. I'll briefly go to Marina again. We tried to come up with a question related to our landscape. Is Jane Jacobs in her book, Economy of Cities, in 1969, she wrote that we are so used to thinking of farming only as a rural activity. We are especially apt to overlook the fact that a new kind of farming comes out of cities. How do you foresee the new agro-urban landscape and adaptation of developing urban farming culture in the city when people are more occupied with white-collar jobs? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to be very brief. I think you're really right that white-collar jobs are disconnected to where the food comes from, and that's a huge problem because it's also related to this idea of food security and how it has become like a key touch point for the urban community. So the more you are disconnected to nature, the more mistrust also you have from where the food comes from, how it is produced. So there's a double gap that I think it's interesting to explore. On one hand, I think that we will have to integrate urban agriculture in another way in the planning of our city. So it starts. We need to start from the beginning of the problem, because we need to embrace a more circular economy. We need to consume kilometer zero product. That means that agriculture needs to be back again nearby us, and that's something that has to come from scratch, from the planning moment. But for me, and following your Jane Jacobs citation, I think that it's important farming in a urban context, basically, to build community, because this idea of shared, of the common ground, of common, the idea of public participation, of coming back to nature, it's so important that even if it's not economically very sustainable, it has a pedagogical aspect that we cannot neglect. So I think that it's very important to integrate these pockets of urban farming with this vocation. Share, learn ancient techniques, vernacular techniques that are being lost, to reconnect with nature and feel that you are part of a community and feel that you are part of a relation with the landscape.
Thank you. I'll now quickly go to David. David I'm going toward the market force. So allied urban professional, designer, activist act more socially and culturally responsibly when he or she has a very little control over the market force. How do you foresee that?
Well,
I would request you to be very brief, please.
Yeah. Again, it has to do with how we define ourselves as professionals. When a corporation employs a lawyer or an accountant, they are asking the lawyer and the accountant to identify what the red lines are. What can I do that maximizes my profit and I pay as little taxes as possible, but I don't want to break the law, because if I break the law, I'm going to be in trouble. And when the lawyer says you can do this, but you can't do that, the corporation says thank you, and they pay them a lot of money to do that. Now, if designers became the people who indicate where the red lines are in terms of social equity and environmental sustainability and cultural diversity and so on and so forth, and were respected as doing that, that would be a good situation. That's where being an ambassador is better than being a servant. However, in order to do that, the first minds we have to change are the minds of the designers themselves. And that requires a different set of skills, a different education, a strong community ethic, a canon of professional practice. So there's a lot to be done. But all we have to do that is to first change the minds of all the designers and then change the minds of everybody else. And that's a small job, but we can do it.
Thank you. I like the statement that ambassador. Yeah. Yeah. I'll briefly go to now to Lykke. Actually, Martin already has talked about it briefly, but I will seek an answer from you in terms of perspective of the local government representative. Do you think that current trend of rapidly transforming smaller cities into concept of smart cities is rendering the cities with a common identity across the globe and in turn diminishing their inherent cultural identity and the heritage that make the places?
I'm not so sure I will link it to smart cities, but I think there's definitely some things going on in urban planning that sometimes make it difficult for you to actually decide where in the world am I actually. It's mainly when you go to the shopping districts because everything's the same. You go to hotels and so on, everything looks exactly the same whether you are here in Dubai or whether or not in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, or you are in Copenhagen or you are in Liverpool or wherever you go. So there's a lot of this thing about market-driven development, which is creating the same things, and I think it's something that we as a city government, that we need to actually work against this, and it's really, really hard. We can also see it in Copenhagen how also when it comes to development of new types of housing and so on, a lot of it look the same. And it looks the same again in New York. Only the buildings are taller in New York, but it's more or less the same type of buildings that we are building in Copenhagen. We're just building them a bit lower than they do in New York. And I think governments have to dare to, especially if you are in a good economic situation, you have to dare to actually have demands to people who are developing. You have to have demands about, not so much about the buildings, but actually equally about what's going on between the buildings. There's a very famous Danish architect called Jan Gehl, who is actually known for his book about life between the buildings. And it's one of the things that we have taken into some of our new architectural policy in Copenhagen, is actually to first focus about urban life, secondly about mobility, and actually at the very last about the buildings themselves, because they are making the framework for what goes on in between them.
Thank you, Lykke. We were just coming to the question. I will end the last question will be to Martin, but before that, I'll ask Sharifah to come up with the example in the world where cultural heritage is being blended in cities to make space for profitable business. They develop new forms of cultural infrastructure. Those cities not only create a new form of cultural locality, they also promote urban economic development by making connection between tourism. Now, through these, what we call that cities and spaces, while we develop, there should be segment for age group of population to partake social and cultural expression. And the cities should be sustainable and socially inclusive, especially for women, children, and youth. And because it eliminates all physical and spatial forms of segregation and exclusion. As a representative of youth, do you think it is possible to attain 2030 define the profit motive of the marketplace? Because sometimes they deny the cultural and heritage issues in terms of the profit. So how do you think that as an youth it is possible to make by 2030?
Okay, thank you. I think I would like to encourage people to go beyond about thinking the culture as something that commodified, but rather to think it beyond the broader way. And I think sustainability is now acceptable for everyone, because like just now when we are talking about SDG, we will emphasize on three things: social, environment, and also economic. But if we just think about economy, it will not go where, because for me, human basic needs will always win, because we are serving the people. So, for example, when we are talking about the cities, right, we are expecting that 70% of the population will live in the cities by 2050. So, for example, when we are attracting people to buy houses, we as the people who want to buy the house, we will think about what we will get around the house. Is there any spaces like parks or everything that we can chill with our families? Is there any leave that provided for the people, for the disability people, or maybe the women or the older generation? And is there any other basic things like hospitals, or maybe general places to chill, like malls and everything? So I think it is very important to take into accounts of the things that related to the people. For example, in Malaysia, our housing ministry provide some rules under the National Affordable Housing Policies. Even to make a cheap house, we did not neglect the issues of the size. For example, our ministry provide the rules for the developers to provide the house not below 900 square feet, for example, and it is not should be lower than 3 rooms. The minimum rooms will be 3 rooms. Why? Because if you have families, if the family have children, so if you just have one house, it will not relate to the urban well planning, then the well-being of the people. So I think back to the discussion, human necessities, human needs will always win, and for that again, cross-sectional issues should be looked into depth, and must be prioritized the vulnerable, not to say vulnerable groups, but the people that we should think, like women, children, and the youth.
Thank you. We'll take 2 more questions. Would you like to? Okay, please go ahead. I will take one question from the floor. Please, can someone give the microphone to him?
No, Kid, a few seconds ago, or minutes ago, the girl came in with a sign that said, "Finito, no more, it's time." So I will leave the question to be answered, if possible, in a written form, and I will say why. The question is, for many years, Union International of Architects has one Congress every 3 years. Now, for the ones that are going to be carrying on in Rio and in Copenhagen, the Congress nominates by UNESCO World Capital of Architecture. And I would like to have from the board of yours one written form how this could be understood in a comprehensive way. And I will publish that in Rio de Janeiro in our own folder, just to say what you think, each one, about being capital of the world in architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We briefly met in Rio, and he's a very influential person and connoisseur of SDG. Thank you very much for coming to our program. I will last question to, is there any other question from the floor? And if not, then I'll go to Martin. We often think that this is the fourth industrial revolution coming, and it will turn new district or urban phenomena. Investment in technology could itself not only be profitable, but at the same time foster the sustainable urbanization in the long run as a whole. The inability of recognizing conflict gives rise to this problem. Some people argue that later does not guarantee any immediate profit and also requires ample time to ensure success. But time is very precious. We only have a decade ahead of us, 2030. We have to complete our SDG goals, 17 goals. It's an impossible goal, but it's doable if we all work together. How do we mitigate this within this short time with an innovative ideas? Thank you, Martin. We have to finish the...
Yeah. I will be very brief. I will have 2 sentences. When I first read the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I thought, well, this is where urban planning and landscape architecture is all about. So I recognize it it has most of the ingredients of urban planning and landscape design inside it. That means that there is no other discipline than urban planning, regional planning and landscape planning, landscape design, that is able to implement most of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That brings a heavy burden on our shoulder of our profession. The problem is that we are not always in the position to take that responsibility. And that is because most of the cities and regions are organized in silos. That means we have a very strong department for transport, very strong department for land use. And when it comes to urban planning, there's another silo, but those silos do not communicate or do not work together. You immediately see that and recognize it when you are in China, for instance. I've been working in major cities there. We were asking the Department of Mobility, where are your metro lines? Where are you planning them? And they told us that is a state secret. We will not tell you. So in that way, we are not in the position to implement the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, although the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are more or less the nerve system, or it's more or less the pattern language for urban planning, regional planning, and landscape architecture.
Thank you, Martin. We are gonna close the session. If there is anyone want to raise any question, Martin, you wanted to ask something? It's okay. So if there is not any question, I'd like to close the session because time is already up. I will distribute some books and we'll take a photo and then we close the session. Thank you for coming. It's been a wonderful panel with very diversified speakers, geographically, age and gender and everything. So thank you very much, everybody. coming from all the way to this. Give them a round of applause.